In early 1991, the desert sky lit up with fire and thunder. A storm was coming, not of rain, but of missiles, tanks, and jets. They called it Operation Desert Storm. Backed by more than 30 nations and led by the US, it took just 100 hours to bring Saddam Hussein's army to its knees. Was it really a victory or just the start of something far more dangerous? It looked like a clean win. Fast, powerful, decisive. But behind the headlines was a broken country, crushed uprisings, and a storm that never really ended. This is how the Gulf War was won and what it truly left behind. It is the summer of 1990. Saddam Hussein, the leader of Iraq, is still reeling from a brutal war with Iran. For 8 long years, his country fought back and forth, battlefield by battlefield, at a devastating cost. Iraqi soldiers were dying by the tens of thousands. Cities lay in ruins, and Iraq's economy was collapsing. The country was deep underwater, about $80 billion in debt to be exact. It needed money, and they needed it fast. Saddam faced crashing oil prices, made worse by Kuwait's overproduction. He demanded debt relief and cuts to output, but diplomacy failed. So, he turned to force, seeing Kuwait's wealth and weak defenses as an opportunity. On August 2, 1990, Saddam sent 100,000 troops backed by hundreds of tanks and artillery straight into Kuwait. It's a blitzkrieg. Within just 48 hours, his forces took over Kuwait. The emir fled the country. Kuwait's central bank was raided for around $2 billion. Oil fields were seized, doubling Iraq's reserves overnight. But something unexpected happened next. The world didn't just watch. The UN stepped in and demanded Iraq to withdraw. When Saddam refused, sanctions followed, Iraqi assets were frozen, exports were slashed, and the country was economically isolated. Since oil made up 90% of Iraq's budget, the impact was severe. And then everything changed. That's when Operation Desert Storm kicked off. Saddam had everyone on edge, especially Saudi Arabia. So they called in the US for backup. Starting in late August, American troops began pouring into the desert, over 500,000 of them. They brought tanks, helicopters, and mountains of gear. In no time, they were building roads, runways, and even entire bases out of nothing. And they weren't alone. More than 30 countries joined in: Britain, France, Egypt, and even Syria. It was shaping up to be a massive fight. Still, there was hope for a peaceful solution. Diplomats keep talking. The UN gave Saddam until January 15th to withdraw his forces, but he refused to budge. Then, on January 17, 1991, the war began, not with tanks, but with a storm of bombs from the sky. It became the largest air campaign the world had ever seen. Over 2,400 coalition aircraft took to the skies, dropping precision-guided bombs, launching stealth attacks, and dominating the airspace with fighter jets. Iraqi air defenses like radar towers, missile sites, and anti-air batteries were hit hard by Apaches, secret F-117s, and cruise missiles that struck with near-perfect accuracy. The impact was immediate. Within the first 72 hours, coalition forces destroyed around 44 Iraqi airfields, wiped out hundreds of aircraft shelters, and crippled command posts and communication centers. In response, Iraqi pilots launched Scud missiles at Israel and Saudi Arabia. Saddam hoped this would fracture the coalition, but the plan backfired. Israel, under heavy diplomatic pressure from Washington, stayed out of the war. The US deployed Patriot missile batteries to intercept the Scuds and sent in Delta Force and SAS units to hunt down the launchers. The coalition held together. As the bombing continued, the skies turned dark with thick black smoke, much of it coming from the massive fires Saddam's retreating troops had set in the Kuwaiti oil fields. These fires were more than just environmental disasters. They blocked visibility, poisoned the air, and made airstrikes harder to carry out. That was exactly the point. It was a cruel move, but it gave Iraq more time. On the ground, Iraqi soldiers were terrified and disoriented. Some watched Baghdad getting bombed live on television from the front lines. The fear and confusion were overwhelming. The air campaign lasted for 6 weeks and caused the bulk of the destruction. Coalition bombers methodically dismantled Iraq's war machine. Tank units ran out of fuel or lost contact with headquarters. Mortar teams were blown apart. Supply lines vanished. Towns, bunkers, and trenches were turned to rubble. Artillery crews waited for reinforcements that never came. The bombing didn't let up until Iraq's ability to fight was completely broken. Then, on February 24, 1991, the ground invasion began. It was fast, terrifying, and brutally effective. American, British, French, and Arab forces moved in from multiple directions. Saudi units lined up in the east. Marines pushed into Kuwait, while US and French airborne units flanked from the west. Fake landings near Kuwait City tricked Iraqi forces into staying put. It was a classic battlefield trickery using surprise and attacks from the sides. By that evening, coalition tanks had cut supply lines, surrounded Iraqi units, and shattered morale. Many positions collapsed, and soldiers surrendered in waves. The 101st Airborne flew 270 kilometers deep into Iraq, cutting off reinforcements and wrecking bunkers. Marines faced incoming Iraqi armor and neutralized them with deadly precision. Resistance was minimal because the battlefield had already been softened by weeks of relentless bombing. Trenches were destroyed, air defenses gone, and Iraqi troops dazed. In one clash, 13 American M1A1 Abrams tanks knocked out 35 Iraqi tanks in under 2 minutes, thanks to superior night vision, armor, and training. Iraqi crews in outdated tanks were completely outmatched. Within just 2 days, coalition forces smashed 24 Iraqi divisions. Thousands surrendered. On roads like Highway 80 and the Highway of Death, retreating convoys became targets. Coalition jets struck vehicles, leaving behind wreckage and raising questions about civilian casualties. By February 26th, Kuwait was fully liberated. Iraqi troops fled in chaos. 2 days later, President Bush declared victory. Kuwait is liberated. Iraq's army is defeated. But the story didn't end there. Inside Iraq, rebellion erupted. Shia in the south and Kurds in the north rose up, believing the West would back them. They seized buildings, clashed with loyalist troops, and demanded change. In southern cities like Basra, what began as spontaneous protests turned violent. Government forces clamped down quickly, using main battle tanks and helicopter gunships left standing after the ceasefire. Kurdish rebels in the north made early gains too, lifting control of towns and cities. The hope was real. Revolution felt possible. Before things became irreversible, US and coalition leaders hesitated. They feared that toppling Saddam might cause chaos or give Iran more influence. So instead of backing the uprisings, they drew the line. No-fly zones were set up in the north and south to protect civilians, and some humanitarian aid was sent. But they didn't push forward to Baghdad. Within weeks, Saddam's forces regrouped and cracked down. Civilians were killed from rooftops, thousands were executed, Kurdish towns were destroyed, and reports of chemical weapons emerged. The US blocked some attacks in the north using air power, but they didn't move to remove Saddam. Political fears held them back. Many rebels felt abandoned. "We were told to rise," one Kurdish activist later said, "but when we did, America looked away." Inside Iraq, Saddam held on to power. The military and government structure survived. Repression followed, especially in areas that had dared to rebel. The hope for change was crushed. In numbers, the coalition lost under 300 troops, with hundreds more wounded. Iraq's losses were staggering, with up to 50,000 soldiers killed, tens of thousands captured or missing, and civilian deaths from war and crackdowns estimated between 100,000 and 180,000. Kuwait lost over 1,000 civilians, and its oil fields were left burning and devastated. For years, people remembered the traumatic experience. Smart bombs hitting targets, tanks burning in the desert, and the highway of death littered with destroyed vehicles. But behind that trauma, Iraq was left in ruins with no power, broken hospitals, and food shortages. The country was shattered, and sanctions kept it isolated. And then came Gulf War syndrome. Veterans began reporting strange symptoms: fatigue, memory loss, pain, and breathing problems. The cause wasn't clear. Some blamed oil fires, others mentioned depleted uranium, vaccines, or pills given to guard against nerve gas. Over 250,000 US veterans reported symptoms, but the mystery remained unsolved. Despite these costs, the Gulf War was often praised as a clean, fast war. Technology and global unity delivered quick results. But beneath the surface, there were troubling signs. Saddam was still in power. Iraq was still unstable. The coalition didn't finish the job, and that decision would echo into the next decade. Throughout the 1990s, Iraq resisted UN inspections, and humanitarian crises worsened. Some in the US began to wonder, should they have gone all the way to Baghdad? That question shaped future policy. In 2003, The US returned, not to free Kuwait, but to remove Saddam. And that war changed everything. Operation Desert Storm ended with a swift military victory, but a fragile peace. It showed how to win a war with precision, coordination, and power. But it also proved that winning peace takes far more. The war left behind a broken country, wounded veterans, and unfinished business. In the end, Desert Storm was not just a victory, it was a warning. If you were in charge of the coalition, would you have stopped at Kuwait or gone all the way to Baghdad? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you made it this far, you've earned a promotion, General of the Like Button Brigade. Smash that thing like it's an enemy radar station. And hey, if you're not secretly a Scud missile, subscribe. And if you haven't seen our other videos yet, what are you doing, soldier? Fall back and check those out. We've got war stories, cold fronts, and chaos hotter than an Abrams engine. Go watch them now before history repeats itself.